So kia ora tātou, welcome to this hui on fair pay agreements. It's really good to be here, and we've got 45 minutes, so we're going to do a crash course in what are fair pay agreements, and also what is underway in regards to getting them across the line, this legislation across the line. And to help us do that, we're very pleased to have Melissa Ansell-Bridges and Tali Williams from the NCTU. So I will let you guys introduce yourselves.
All right, kia ora koutou everyone. Ko Melissa Ansell-Bridges, tōku ingoa, ko te koua ka mahi te mahi. I'm Melissa Ansell-Bridges. I'm the Secretary of the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. Really pleased to be here today talking to you all about fair pay agreements, which is arguably the biggest change in employment law that we've seen in a generation, and it's happening now, which is really exciting. I'll talk to you in a little bit about where things are at with the campaign, where we are in the legislative process, and how you can get involved to make sure that your voice is heard, to make sure that we get the best fair pay agreement legislation possible, because now is our chance to really do that. So it's really important that we're having this conversation now. So I'll do that shortly, but before I do that, Tali's going to tell everyone a little bit more about, what fair pay agreements are, why they're important. So I'll hand over to Tali to introduce herself, and then she can kick us off. Thanks, Tali.
Thanks, Melissa. Kia ora koutou, ko Tali Williams, tōku ingoa. My role at the moment in New Zealand Council of Trade Unions Te Koe Ka Mahi is that of Fair Pay Agreement National Coordinator. I've been in the role for a couple of weeks. It's obviously an extremely exciting time for fair pay agreements, and I'll just talk a little bit about why. So the government is implementing a fair pay agreement system. That's the bill that's in the House at the moment, and Melissa will talk more about the legislative process and our role in the legislative process in a minute. But I'm just talking a bit about the general kind of concept of fair pay agreements. So they're a new mechanism for bargaining to set binding minimum terms and conditions across an occupational industry. So while the economy has grown over the last 30 years, wages have lagged behind significantly. Those really high earners have seen their wages increase at about twice the rate of middle and low income earners. Less than 1 in 5 New Zealanders are represented in collective bargaining, and that's down from around 70% 3 decades ago. So something's got to give, right? We know that some businesses report this idea that they'd like to pay higher wages, but they can't afford to because other companies will undercut them on wages and provide cheaper goods and services as a result. And that can be sort of described as a race to the bottom, an incentive to pay the lowest wages possible. Reducing poverty and inequality in New Zealand depends on regulation that prevents this, and that's what fair pay agreements will deliver. Minimum and industry-wide standards will take out the competition around wages for the lowest paid. It'll take it out of the equation, sorry. So it means that those decent employers who want to do right by their staff are not going to be undercut by exploitative, cheap employers. It means that business competition can be based on the best delivery of service, quality performance, best products, etc., rather than the lowest possible wages, as we see in so many of those low-paid industries. So the fair pay agreement system aims to bring employers and unions within a sector to bargain for minimum standards for all of those employees within either that industry or occupation. The proposed system will also include support for bargaining parties to help them navigate the negotiation process, given this is all very brand new. There's no blueprint for this. So MB and the government will also be able to sort of, in the first round, help us reach an outcome, as well as put in place processes to ensure compliance from employers. So overall, fair pay agreements will increase bargaining power for workers, ensure that the minimum pay and employment terms are reflective of the needs of a sector covered by that FPA, create an environment where businesses compete based on better products and services rather than driving down wages conditions, incentivising businesses to invest in training and innovation, creating sector-wide coordination, boosting living standards for employees and their families, most importantly. So in summary, it's easier for workers to receive fair wages and conditions and avoid that race to the bottom that occurs within competitive industries by legislating for and implementing fair pay agreements. And I'll just give you a bit of an example of that in the supermarket sector, which is where I come from. I come from First Union before I came to NCTU. And one of the employers that we dealt with a lot in the supermarkets was Countdown. So we go into Countdown bargaining, and Countdown, of course, they run a centralised business model. So you've got one company, and that they run all of the 180 Countdown stores versus Pack and Save and also Foodstuffs, who runs their Pack and Saves and New World sort of owner-operator model. So we go into Countdown, highly unionised, sit across the table from them, and Countdown would say, hey, no fear. You know, Pack and Saves down the road are paying minimum wages. We have to pay more just because we have a unionised supermarket, and also because we have the centralised model, and they get to pay minimum wages. And of course, because it takes so much more resource to organise Pack and Save by Pack and Save, less Pack and Saves are organised and unionised. So Countdown have got a point. It's not a level playing field. So Pack and Save have been undercutting Countdown for many years, paying much less, and therefore being able to have a competitive advantage. That won't be able to happen anymore with fair pay agreements. So a supermarket fair pay agreement would mean that all supermarkets would have to pay the same. And while the wages that are paid to supermarkets at the moment are in general not enough, not even in Countdown, the other part of the bill that's so important for people to realise is that one of the key purposes is actually raising the wages of low-paying industries. So the Employment Relations Authority, when they're making determinations about fair pay agreements, should it get to that point of determination, and I'll talk more about that process in a minute, they will have to take into account that the bill specifically talks about the intention to raise low-wage industries. So it's not just a case of, oh, hopefully Pack and Save will have to come up to Countdown's level. We're actually looking to bring up the entire industry as a whole through that intention of the fair pay agreement process. So I'll talk a little bit more about how it actually works, because now that we have the bill in front of us, we've got a bit more of an understanding of that. And part of my role is going to be creating some resources that will help people understand this process, because it's not that straightforward, unfortunately. So to put it as simply as I kind of can, I've sort of cut it into some different steps. So first of all, in order to be able to initiate a fair pay agreement in an occupation or industry, the union that is associated with that occupation or industry must gather 1,000 signatures of workers who want a fair pay agreement to be initiated. So it's got to be proved to be popular. It can't just be a union dreaming up, this is kind of what we want for this industry. They've got to be able to prove that this is something the workers want as well. So that's the first step. And then they have to get that initiation then approved by the Ministry of Business and Innovation of Employment, CEO, just to make sure, for example, that those 1,006 signatures are legit and all of that kind of thing. Then an employee bargaining side is formed, and the union that has initiated for bargaining must inform every other union. So it's not just that union alone, they've got to inform other unions with members within that coverage. And they also have to inform every employer in that coverage as well of that FPA. In turn, the employers that would be covered by that fair pay agreement within an industry, and let's use supermarkets for example again, Foodstuffs and Countdown, Fresh Collective, any other Four Squares, all of them would need to be informed that a fair pay agreement has been initiated, and that they must then provide the union with the contact details of every worker in that work site. So every employer within that industry and every worker within that work site, not just union members, everybody. That information must go to the union, so the union is able to contact those people and arrange claims meetings or anything that needs to occur. So it's not a case of the union trying to have to find all that information themselves. There are obligations in the Act and the bill that's on the table at the moment that employers must give that information to the union. On the other side of the table, the employer bargaining side also have to form themselves in some kind of, organise themselves in some kind of way. So, for example, it might be in the case of the supermarkets, it could be a representative from Foodstuffs and Countdown, or they may employ the Employers Manufacturers Association representative to represent their side or whatever it is. So they've got to form their side. And each party has to organise an inter-party agreement to work alongside each other. So it may be multiple unions on the employee side, it may be multiple employers on the employer side. They have to work together well, and there are specific rules around working together. After those bargaining parties have been formed, the union can give 2 weeks' notice to have 2-hour paid meetings in relation to that proposed fair pay agreement. The union may also access workplaces, like the same way we can access workplaces to talk to workers about joining the union. We can access them to talk to workers about the fair pay agreement that will cover them. So those 2-hour paid meetings, you can imagine this could be quite prolific, because we're not just talking about union members, we're talking about everybody in that industry. So unions will need to be creative around how those meetings are held, and there's a lot of thinking going on around that at the moment, but a lot of that stuff might end up being online. So then you're sitting down at the bargaining table. If you can imagine those two sides have come together, you've done your meetings, you bring these are the wages we want, this is the health and safety provisions we want, these are the hours of work we want, and so on. And the parties start to bargain. The authority has a role to determine any matter that occurs within bargaining where or on the terms that the parties cannot agree on. So the parties, for example, if they can't agree, have got to use mediation first. But if it's just still not getting anywhere, then the Employment Relations Authority can step in and make a determination around what that fair pay agreement will look like. Obviously, the other side of that is if the parties are happy, they've reached an agreement, they're quite happy with that, then it would go to the ratification process. As mentioned before, but just to be clear, either bargaining party may seek a determination of one or all of the terms in the fair pay agreement if agreement can't be reached. But also, if you've tried to ratify it twice and still can't ratify it, then again, the Employment Relations Authority can step in and make a determination. In order to ratify a fair pay agreement, there needs to be a vote of 50% plus 1 of all of the workers who vote within that industry. And also 50% plus 1 of all employers who vote. There's a bigger weighting for bigger employers, they get more votes, and smaller employers get smaller votes. So that's the process. Don't try and remember it all in your head. It's too complex right now. We'll get it out in a simple form for everybody. But I just want to talk to a couple of things before I pass to Melissa. One is that fair pay agreements give us a chance to speak to a lot of non-members, particularly in that first process when we're trying to get 1,000 signatures to support a fair pay agreement in an occupational industry. That's a really exciting opportunity to talk to people about joining the union as well. Not just about fair pay agreements, but also getting them on board to join the union. One thing I wasn't clear on before is that you can't strike over fair pay agreements, which is why the Employment Relations Authority can make a determination on what the fair pay agreement can be, because there's that power of being able to strike is taken away, but the power you do get is that the Employment Relations Authority, a third party, can come in and go, all right, this is what that fair pay agreement will look like, as opposed to the employer just being able to walk away from the table and saying, we're not going to have a fair pay agreement. They can't do that. Once it's initiated, a fair pay agreement will come into play. It must, because worst case scenario, you can always have the Employment Relations Authority make a determination about what it's to be. The likely first fair pay agreements that have been, there's a bit of consensus across the union movement on this, they're likely to be the buses, the supermarkets, security, cleaners, and also early childhood centre workers. So these are deemed to be some of the most vulnerable workers that most urgently need a fair pay agreement in their industry. But that's not to say others can't initiate at any time as well. Once this becomes law, you can initiate as long as you fulfil the load boxes that I talked about earlier. You can do that. There's various ways, I guess, at the moment that unions are getting the word out about fair pay agreements, including education sessions, social media outreach, affiliate coordination, so union coordination, organising towards fair pay agreements. And obviously this whole time I've also been in the room with government, business, anyone else, the media, to push the union agenda on processes and policy around fair pay agreements as well. So now I'm going to pass on to Melissa. Sorry, I stole a bit of your time, Melissa.
No, that's all good, not a problem. Thanks, Tali. So obviously this is a really exciting development for us in New Zealand. You can hear from what Tali said how much this is going to, fundamentally improve things for working people in New Zealand, especially those people who are in those vulnerable industries in the short term. But, the potential for fair pay agreements moving beyond that, when we start thinking about like the second and the third tranches of fair pay agreements that could be initiated, you can really think about how industries as a whole will benefit from fair pay agreements because of the coordination that can be done across industries. So this is going to improve working conditions, but also strengthen the success of industries across the whole New Zealand economy, which is really exciting for everyone. We will all benefit from this, from fair pay agreements when they exist in industries that we might not necessarily work in as well, because we can expect for those industries to be operating more efficiently as well. So it's all good, which is super exciting. So I just want to give you a little bit of an overview about where we are at now with the fair pay agreement process and where to next and what opportunities there are to help us all out in terms of trying to get this across the line, get us the strongest fair pay agreement legislation possible. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Now I know, being PSA members, some of you are going to be intimately familiar with this process about how a bill becomes law. But just in case there's anyone here who's not familiar with this process, I'm just going to give you a quick overview here. So you can see up the top, a bill is introduced, and then there's the first reading of the bill. Then the bill goes to select committee, and that's where we are at now. So the first reading of the bill happened last week. It's now in select committee, and the select committee is receiving submissions until the 19th of May. So we've got a little bit longer for the select committee submissions. And then once the select committee's heard all of the submissions, they'll take written submissions, and then there'll be an opportunity to give oral submissions as well. My understanding is that they are considering holding some regional select committees as well. So if people are wanting to present orally, but they're not able to make it to Wellington, then they'd be able to do that in the regions. I don't know if that's been confirmed yet though, but that's a possibility. Then there'll be a second reading and a third reading as well. And if it is passed at that point, then it will be signed by the Governor General and will become an act. So we can expect this part of the process, the bill actually becoming law, to happen towards the end of this year. So we're probably realistically thinking November for that to be happening. So there's a little bit of work to do before then. And the big thing, the big opportunity that we have now is really making the most of the select committee process, because that's when the general public can submit on the legislation and show their support for fair pay agreements. to, help convince politicians that this is a thing that they need to vote in favour of. But it's also an opportunity if we're wanting to seek any changes to the legislation, to make any improvements to it. This is our opportunity to do that as well. So it's really important that we participate in that process. And the way to do that is making a submission. So we're really focused on getting as many submissions as possible into Select Committee before it closes on the 19th of May. And that's why we, the CTU and our affiliates, particularly those ones who are actively engaged in trying to get some of those first fair pay agreements, are running an event, running a campaign called Speak Up Sunday. And I'm going to show you another little image for Speak Up Sunday. Wait a second. Here we go. Okay, so Speak Up Sunday is on the 1st of May, which is a really important day for unions. Obviously, it's May Day, and so it seems like the perfect opportunity to make the most of celebrating and trying to get this legislation, which is going to help workers across the line. So Speak Up Sunday is really about trying to encourage people to participate in this process, to submit on the legislation. So we're asking people to do 3 things on that 1st of May, if not before. The first one's shooting a short video selfie, and I'll show you the tool that we're using for that shortly. This is one which can feel a little bit intimidating for people. Often people don't like putting themselves on video, which I totally understand, but there's so much power that comes from people seeing people's faces and hearing their voice when they're sort of talking about why something is important to them. It's really, really powerful having those videos in terms of trying to convince politicians that this is something that people really want to see. And then the second thing is making an online submission. And again, I'll show you shortly the tool that we are using for online submissions to be made. And the third is talking to your workmates and talking to your friends and your family, all your colleagues, anyone that'll listen about why fair pay agreements are important and why we need to, get them across the line, and also encouraging them to take those first 2 actions as well. So that's Speak Up Sunday. On the day, there'll be lots happening online. There are going to be some events in person. And there'll be we'll be sharing some of those videos that people record, and so there'll be sort of lots of activity all around fair pay agreements, trying to spread the word. So that's super exciting. Now I will show you our video tool. We'll send through all of these details. I mean, Brendon already has them, but we'll make sure that you've got access to all of these links as well. So if you're keen to share a video, then you can do that. You get to see me embarrassing myself filming a video here, asking people to actually make a submission as well. You don't need to hear the whole thing. But yeah, so there's a tool here where you hop on, you can listen to me asking you to record a video, and then you press record your answer, and you can record a little video saying, really want to see FPAs happen. They're really important. This is the impact that it would mean, for me, etc. And yeah, it's super straightforward. It's a really easy tool to use. So that was that first ask. The second one is around making a written submission. And this is our page here where you can do that. So there's a couple of prompts there, things that you might, want to think about when you're writing the submission. And then there's just a handy tool down there on the right-hand side where you can write in your submission. So you don't have to, formally lay it out as, a submission on a document and send it into the Select Committee. We've made that really easy. We'll be handing these submissions over on Speak Up Sunday. We'll be handing them over to the Minister and sending them through to Select Committee. So that's just helping everyone make that process a little bit more efficient as well. So those are the 2 main asks. We've also got a heap of resources available to sort of explain fair pay agreements. We've got them in digital forms. We've also got some printed ones as well. So, if you're having meetings with friends and would like access to some of those resources, we do have some spare. And we'll also send through all of those links with the resources as well, so that they can be used in meetings and in conversations that you're having with people as well. We've also got a couple of videos which we'll send through. There's one which is a really handy explainer video, just about, basically what Tali told you about, but just with a couple of minutes and with a few sort of diagrams in there. So that's sort of short and sharp, and it's very bright and colourful and fun as well. It'd be really great to have a look at that. Also share it around if you're on Facebook, sharing it there. And also, sharing it with members, with fellow union members, with colleagues as well. There's another video as well which does a bit of an explainer about some of the lines we can expect to hear from business. And I think that's just the other thing that I want to touch on last, is that we can expect pretty firm pushback against fair pay agreements. They are something which is going to be a really, powerful tool for working people, and there are definitely some voices in business and in the opposition, towards who are sort of against seeing fair pay agreements become a reality. And there's been some outright scaremongering and also some misinformation about what fair pay agreements are and how they work. And we've got a video as well, which we'll share. It's a satire video, and it is sort of showing up the ridiculousness of some of those arguments, I suppose. So that's another great one to share as well. So if you're keen to help out, those are the ways that would really make a huge difference. It's making a written submission, filming that video, and also sharing some of those resources as well, which we will send through to you too. So that's everything from me, Brendon, but I think we've got some time now for questions as well. Thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Melissa and Tali. I think from our perspective for the PSA, we're really keen to see as many submissions coming from members or from sector committees. What's going to be really good is that we've got the wonderful Kirsten Windelov, who's able to help in that process. We'll send through the links, everything you send us through, but we're also really keen to make sure that we have as many people attending to do oral submissions as possible as well. And so that's where you turn up to the select committee and talk about your submission and really eyeball the politicians and make sure that they know that it's about making sure that they do their job, essentially, which is pass laws that are going to make working lives better. When you do make the request to do an oral submission, please contact myself or Kirsten so that we've got a record of that, and then we can contact you closer to the date and give you as much support as possible, come along to the select committee with you, all that sort of stuff. And the other thing is to have a look at the PSA Fair Pay Agreements page, and that's got everything in there that you'll need to know if you've got any questions about fair pay agreements. So let's have some questions. Brad's got one here. How is the owner representative negotiation group being determined, given that there's probably 20 plus pack and saves? Good question.
Right, so I think the answer to that is we don't really know exactly what employers are going to do, but the way that the law is kind of set out, or what the bill sort of says, is that they would organise similar to a union. So they would have an employer organisation or industry organisation. So rather than have 20 plus pack and save owner operators at the table, that they would collectively employ a industry representative, whether that's EMA or a specific supermarket industry representative, or there's someone within the group that they have particular faith in, or whatever it is. But yeah, that's the way that they'll do it, similar to how unions will.
I can imagine that for some employer groups, it's going to be a real struggle, because I can imagine there's some that are can't stand to be in the same room as each other. And here they are, they're going to have to get around the table and actually talk about stuff. It's going to be quite a challenge for some of them. Kirsten.
This is a question for the people in the little participants box down the bottom of the screen. I know that you've all been invited because you are some of the most active people in the PSA. and because you are representatives of either a sector or a network or Te Rūnanga o Ngā Toa Āwhina. So those are all really important voices and perspectives to be heard, and for members of Parliament to hear directly from you. So I'm going to put you on the spot, which won't work, but but I'm really keen to know if you're willing to think about doing a submission, because we'd really like to support you to do that. You can either, I'll put my email address in the chat. If you want to put up your hand now and say, yes, we will do a submission, that is awesome. If you'd rather have a think about it or talk to you, other people on your committee, that's great too. And I'll stick my email address in the chat, and you can get in touch through that.
We've got Karen Munro is already putting a hand up. That is fantastic. And we also have a question from Nikki regarding wondering how FPAs will impact on the minimum wage exemption for disabled people. Do you want to perhaps comment on that?
Yeah, jump in as well, Tali, if you've got thoughts on this, but I suppose they will operate separately, so there won't necessarily be a direct impact. That said, because fair pay agreements are setting minimum standards, which in many cases, we expect to be above the pre-existing legal minimums, there is an opportunity there potentially for that to be something which is bargained as a part of a fair pay agreement. So the fair pay agreement sort of becomes a tool through which you can try and improve things in that area in the industry that it exists.
How broad is that 1,000?
And the answer really is it depends. It depends on the union side, sort of determining as they go out and try and get those 1,000 signatures what the scope is that they're intending to cover. So if the side, bargaining in that hypothetical said, we want it to cover all bus drivers, including school bus drivers and everyone, and they, had all of the relevant unions on board for that plan, and they got 1,000 signatures from that sort of broader cohort, then that could happen. Or they might just say, we want to focus on just this group of drivers. There's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of the size of the scope, provided it's determined at the outset, and then that 1,000 signatures or 10% is coming from whatever the scope that's been determined is.
How does this then interact with the collective agreements that we have?
Yeah, so basically the collective agreements that you have will remain in place, and the only thing that would change would be if there was something in one of your collective agreements which was lesser than a fair pay agreement that covered your occupational industry. So if you had wages in there that were lower than the fair pay agreement that was associated with your industry or occupation, they would go up regardless of what it was in your collective agreement. They would go up to whatever the fair pay agreement is. So you'd still continue to negotiate your collective agreements year upon year. There's no reason to stop those, of course. That'll just go over and above whatever's in the fair pay agreement.
So it's very much about making whatever the case is, whichever's higher, whether it's your collective agreement or the fair pay agreement is what applies.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm just conscious of time, so. Thank you so much for your coming along and giving us that 101 and really appreciate it. And for those of you who turned up and spent some of your lunch hour, thank you. And we will send through a summary of all the links. And also we've already got one taker for a oral submission, writing a submission and doing an oral submission, so that's fantastic. But we'll also be coming around your various sector committees and networks and the Runanga and saying we need your submissions, and we need them by the 19th of May. So we don't have a lot of time, just over a month. We need to get them in and make sure that we're all sort of locked in for doing those oral submissions as well. So thank you so much, peer review, for coming along and giving us that update. And thank you everyone else for attending, and we'll be in touch.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Roy. Bye.